It's okay. Laptop is fine.
Good afternoon, all our friends from our media. Thank you very much for your response and for participation and for being here. It's my pleasure and indeed a pleasure to introduce a person whom you know so very well, but introduce, or rather, he is appearing first time in public, so to say, as the president of CII. Mr. Rajiv Memani took over as the president of CII on the 30th of June, a person who needs no introduction in terms of the details on the things that he handles besides EY. He does many, being in the fields of education to industry to economic policy advocacy, and having actually deep involvement with the CII over decades. And I recollect him being in the CII's National Council for not less than 2.5 decades in terms of being collaborating, participating, contributing in many areas of thought leadership. Of course, economic policy, taxation, strategic directions for Indian industry, competitiveness, etc., has been his forte and contribution to the institution as well as to the Indian industry and India Inc., if one may say. Rajiv will have a little truncated year, if I may say, because he was to take over in April, and for certain reasons which we know, our AGM got postponed to early June, and because of important reasons, we had to do it on 30th of June. But we have missed his leadership for a month or two, but then we will make up as we go along. But somebody who is very knowledgeable in the field of what's going on in different sectors of the economy and different parts of the country in terms of industry. So today we present the theme that has been worked upon under his leadership in a consultation process which has involved every section of the Indian industry, and with all 80 odd offices of CII across the country. So that's a contribution which has come into his finalization of the type of areas that he would lead in the course of the year. I'll stop there and request Rajiv Memani, the President CII, to make his presentation on the theme. Thank you. Thanks, Rajiv. Please, thanks. Somebody is saying. Okay.
Can I use this too? And this will also change? So thank you very much, CB, and thanks to all the friends from media. Thank you so much for coming. Very good afternoon to all of you. Let's kick off the presentation. I'll do that, and after that, if anyone has any questions, would be really happy to respond to them. So this is what we were looking at covering. Firstly, just to give a quick overview of the economy. A lot of you are very familiar with that. As CB mentioned, to talk about our theme for the year, which we've had extensive discussions on, and leading with the theme, some of the underlying points of the theme, and then the various CI initiatives that we are planning to do this year, and also a lot of them are continuation. Always, whenever we have looked at the themes, developing the theme for CII, there's an element of what's current, what's more relevant, and also an element of continuity as we look at some of these things. So from an economy standpoint, we all know that there has been a very fundamental recalibration of global trade. And combine that, if you combine that with geopolitics and that's happening, it's given rise to global uncertainty, which is probably almost unprecedented in the recent past. And uncertainty and business are generally not good friends. So I think that has an impact, and as we can see, that has an impact on the global output, which was almost 2.6, 2.7% increase in global output last year, and this year the anticipation is that it'll be negative. So I think we are in a world which is going through lots of change, lots of uncertainty, and that has ramifications not only on the Indian economy, but also significant ramifications on economies around the world, all significant economies around the world. In all this, if I was to look at India, India appears to be a steady hand in what I would say a very fractured global economic order. From all parameters, if we look at what's happening in India, and the growth numbers are a testament to that. For the third year in succession, India will probably be the fastest growing major significant global economy. All macroeconomic parameters, if you look at, are holding up quite well, whether it's inflation, whether it's the interest. I think some of the monetary policy decisions taken by the Reserve Bank of India really need to be appreciated. The health of the banking system is very strong. We have one of the lowest amount of NPAs. The GDP growth numbers that we saw last time had a good combination of growth in consumption, growth in investments. Fiscal deficits are trending down faster than what has been anticipated. There is growth both on the export side, import side, but in particular, growth in service exports has given much greater resilience to the currency, to the foreign exchange reserves that we have. That coupled with the remittances that we have has made the current account deficit almost negligible. So overall, you would say, if you look at the macroeconomic picture of India, and if you look at the individual areas of growth, I think it really gives a picture of very strong resilience. So apart from being amongst the fastest growing economies in the world, it also is probably in one of its strongest, most resilient position, which is really helpful when you are facing a very, very uncertain global order. So if you see what does this mean? So as we are seeing what's happening globally, I think there are 3 or 4 trends that are coming out very clearly, and I think India is also following on those trends. First is there is almost a race to enter FTAs. Globally, people are looking at economic partnerships mostly with friends, some because of a little bit of compulsion, but by and large, the trend for signing FTAs, economic cooperation with people that they can deal with and where the interests are complementary. I think that's one big theme that's coming through. The second is competitiveness of economies. Individual economies has become very strong. So there is a massive push towards trying to see how ease of doing business, reforms in countries that don't have very friendly or have heavy hand of regulation. I think there is a lot of effort, a lot of work that's happening to change that. It's not an easy change, but that's happening. And third is supply chain resilience and focus on manufacturing. So if you actually see what has happened in the last 3 to 6 months, these are the big trends that are coming through. And I think from an Indian standpoint, I think India, if I look at the FTAs, we have been signing FTAs, but the ones that have taken a lot of time to negotiate, UK has got inked. EU, we have made very good progress. I think India is dealing more with the non-tariff barriers in EU rather than the tariff barriers, and how those non-tariff barriers can be simplified. And in US, I think there is, we have a date. Most of the businesses, most of CII members are very keen that an agreement or an FTA or some tranche of an FTA gets signed, because people are wary of a tariff being imposed. And I think there is a reasonable sense of confidence that something may happen in the not too distant future. So I think those, from an FTA standpoint, engagement is going on very well. The second thing is that as we sign FTAs, for a large part, and especially large part of the Western world, the tariffs are going to go down by almost 10 to 15%. So you will have Indian industry facing competitive intensity of a much higher order. And therefore, the urgency to do reforms, the urgency to do business reforms, the urgency to enhance competitiveness is very, very high. And I think we are seeing much greater receptivity and openness in the government to look at ease of doing business, to try and see how they can focus on competitiveness. And there are two themes that are coming out very strongly. First is, obviously, India has to focus much more on manufacturing, particularly on advanced manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing. We'll cover some of this in some of the slides. We'll talk why it is so important for India to get there, and a lot of focus on that through PLI schemes and otherwise. And secondly, if India has to get on the next orbit of growth, and particularly because we have benefited immensely from the services sector, how AI impacts competitiveness in Indian industry, how AI impacts efficiency in the Indian economy, and how from an AI standpoint, how are we able to deal with those issues that are likely to come up going forward, whether it's around employment, competitiveness, and others. I think that's very, very important. So if you broadly look at the agenda, which from a CII standpoint, obviously there are lots of things that we engage with, but reforms and ease of doing business, manufacturing, and AI are the core themes, which I think will define in many ways the long-term competitiveness of India. And I think there are a slew of other things which we'll discuss going forward. So CII does this. The research team in CII has built their growth model, and basically we have 34 high-frequency indicators which start from demand, manufacturing, labor, money markets, financial markets, and as international things are becoming more and more relevant, it also starts to ingest in data about global uncertainty and everything. And based on that, there is an econometric model through which CII makes what we believe is likely to be India's growth. And from CII standpoint, we believe our growth should be in the range of 6.4 to 6.7%. It is not that different from the growth that has been projected by some of the other agencies. It's pretty much in the same zip code. There are obviously some risks to this growth. A lot of those risks are external risks, geopolitical risks, global trade-related risks. But I think a lot of them have been factored in, and also there are some upsides. So hopefully they should get balanced out with each other. So from a CII standpoint, we are looking at 6.4 to 6.7%, and it's been tested with our members, with the business community across. So as I said, these themes are obviously continuity of what we do, because that's what strengthens the institution, strengthens the engagement with government. But also there is an emphasis which is more relevant for the year, and which is more pertinent to make a difference, and also to what government and us business stakeholders are looking at. So our theme is really to say, how can we work towards accelerating competitiveness? This is both from an economy, country, member standpoint. And we think that there are 6 things that we really want to focus on. Obviously, as I said, the next generation reforms are very important. Manufacturing is very important, and I'll get into the details of each one of them. Technology and AI is another very important stream. Sustainability, energy transition, livelihoods, and for us, trust is very, very important, because the cornerstone for everything to happen, especially from a business standpoint, is how trust is developed between members, between business people, and trust is developed between government and business. And this is a two-way street. So for us to achieve as a country our full growth potential, there has to be much greater trust between business and industry and government. So let me start with reforms, and let me get into the some of the details on the next generation reforms. A lot of reforms that we are talking about now are generation 2 of reforms. A lot of these reforms are very minutiae, very detailed, because the high level reforms have been done to a large extent, or the government has taken a stand on that. Now what is required is really level 2, level 3, which business, industry, particularly MSMEs, foreign investors face on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of our engagement in CII is really to get feedback from our members and try and see how we can relay that to the government, and in a constructive way, so that some of these things happen. I will start with fiscal reforms. Obviously, one of the concerns is the health of states, especially given the amount of welfare economics that is currently happening. So really having a control on that, or an oversight on that, through state fiscal councils, who can really independently assess the state of Indian economy, of the state's economy, as well as institutionalizing a credit rating system for states. So it actually effectively operates as a good governor in terms of what's happening, and that will also link to have an impact on the borrowing cost and what amount that states can borrow, what's the level of fiscal deficit that they can do. So that's one area. The second one, which I think CII and many others have been saying for a long time, given the state of capital markets today and given the government ownership today is in the markets is about 10% of our market cap. So our market cap is about 5.5 trillion. 10% of that is 550 billion. So almost 50 lakh crores is what the government owns today in terms of the current value of the shares that they're holding. It's important for the government to hold. Some of these sectors are sensitive, but even if the government was to take 10% of this out, i.e. 5 lakh crore, and if we look at almost all corporates, if I look at foreign investors, they're all trying to see how they can recycle their capital better, how they can deploy their, either raising capital or selling stocks, to say how they can redeploy. I think the government, our strong request to government has been that they should be much more proactive on this. These are capital markets of a lifetime that we are seeing, and if the government can monetize and use this to much better effect and much better purpose, either to some extent reducing debt, but more importantly in trying to see if we can create a sovereign wealth fund which is focused on MSMEs, a sovereign wealth fund that is focused on addressing the critical issues that the economy is facing, especially in terms of rare earth and some critical supply chain dependencies. I think that's very, very important. The second thing is just easing compliances. So if you're looking at setting up a hospital which has a diagnostic center and a pharmacy, you almost need 400 approvals for that. If you're looking at setting up a metals manufacturing facility, you almost need 150 to 175 approvals of that. And in some ways, that's also delaying and slowing down the capex, the speed at which private capex can go down. So we have tried to look at obviously both horizontal and vertical. So industry by industry, what are the things that can happen, that can be done to reduce the number of approvals? Obviously, a lot of these approvals happen at a state level, not at the central level. And also try and look at vertically. So, if you look at, for example, environmental clearances, compliances take a long time. So if there is a unified framework, there are 5 streams under which environmental clearances are taken, whether it's air, water, waste management, forests and other. If they can all be combined and they can be a uniform piece that can be created, that will be much better. If all the state approvals can be consolidated in Parvesh 2.0. And then there are small little things. If you're getting an approval, we have compared this with globally. India's approvals are for the shortest time frame. So depending on the risk factors of the industry, instead of giving an approval for 2 years, can you give it for 5 years? And there can be some compliances that can be given. Likewise on non-polluting industries, for example, an IT industry. If their space they've occupied is more than 20,000 square meters, then you have to take approval. Can it be a much more simplified process by which this approval can be taken? Industrial parks that are already approved, all the units in the industrial parks, do they require approval? So likewise, and on NOCs also, if we can break this into 4, NOCs that are not required should be taken off. Those NOCs that require objective assessment, they can be automated. Those NOCs which require certification can be rely on third-party certification, credible third-party certification, and have a time-bound basis on which some of the NOCs can be achieved. So as I said, a lot of this is detailed. Approval timelines, digitally tracking them, mandating them through legislation, dispute resolution and decriminalization, especially the Jan Vishwas 2.0 has to come, and on technical and procedural violations, at least the criminal pieces should be taken away, and the commercial code infrastructure also has to be expanded. On the tax, and particularly I would say on GST 2.0, GST has been really a big boon for India in the way it's integrated India, the way it's formalized the sectors that were not formal earlier. But I think it's time to look at GST 2.0. One, I think the rate simplification has to happen, and specifically those rates which get into the products that are consumed from an income standpoint by the bottom 20-30% of India. I think there the rates have to be rationalized. And I do hope that the government takes action. I know there is, there have been a lot of representations that have been made. Also, if we can make a more simpler 3-tier structure, I think that will help a lot in boosting consumption and also giving greater relief to the people who are in the lower income strata, because right now in some cases the amount of GST really makes it very, very expensive and throttles consumption. Income tax, the tax credit, input tax credit, GST was set up so that there's no cascading effect, but there are many areas where there is cascading effect, and how those input tax credits can be taken away, and those which are not covered within the remit of GST, whether it is petroleum, electricity, real estate, whether they can be brought in. On audits, and this I would say especially for MSMEs and others, if you're operating in 4 states, 10 states, 12 states, you need to get audited in the main, obviously in the center, but also in so the same piece has to get audited or assessed in 10 or 12 different locations. And people are free to raise the issues, a number of issues they want to raise, how they want to raise, what they want to raise. So our representation to the government has been that please just have audit at one place. And if you're a large company which is not an MSME, have one state to take a lead role. And then whatever audit findings that are there of that state should be implemented across all the states. So that's something that we've been recommending. Likewise on direct taxes, one of the biggest issue, the government is coming up with a new income tax bills. He has made their recommendations. I hope they do get implemented. The other is, reducing tax litigation. One of the biggest issues is tax litigation. We have some alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Some of them are effective, but not as effective as they should be. They need to be dealt with, whether it's APAs, whether it's Bureau of Advanced Ruling, and I think other dispute resolution schemes need to be introduced so that the amount that gets into disputes can really be reduced. And we have made recommendations to the government that as soon as an assessment is done, if there is a dispute, is there an arbitration, is there a mechanism that can be done where those disputes can be resolved? and a lot of the issues that people, SSEs face can be reduced there. And also on the biggest clogging is happening at the Commissioner of Income Tax appeal side. And I think if that can be strengthened, then that's another area that one has to look at. So that is the on ease of doing business. If I look at manufacturing, so the first frame that we were looking at was, how do we look at reforms? And I said a lot of these reforms are now in the detailing. They are the procedural aspects which really create a lot of hurdles. The second area where we are really making a lot of policy recommendations and also working a lot with our members is to say, how do we make India a bigger manufacturing hub? How can there be greater gross value added in India? So if you look at it, roughly China's gross value added, this is for 23, and global gross value added is about 17 trillion. China's gross value added is close to 28%, and India is 2.8%. And that gap, India has to accelerate that gap. And also, if we look at our trade deficit with China, over the last 3 years, 4 years, it's pretty much in the 95 to 105 billion. Yes, the quality of trade deficit is changing. Earlier, a lot of it was raw materials. Now, a lot of it is more finished goods, semi-finished goods. And that's one area that we are looking at. And also, India's share of manufacturing GDP is almost stagnant, if not marginally declining over the last few years. So, I think there is, if you look at this, if you look at what's happening in the world, if you look at gross value added, if you look at India's total GDP composition and manufacturing as that, I think that's one area that we need to work hard on. So the policy suggestions, a lot of it is to encourage advanced manufacturing. A lot of it is to encourage labor-intensive manufacturing. We'll talk through some of them. The PLI schemes have been launched. Total amount allocated in PLI schemes is about 3 lakh crores. That 3 lakh crores has to be spent over a period of 5 to 6 crores. Out of that, only 30,000 crores till now has been spent. So in the 18 PLI schemes that we have, roughly 30,000 crores have been dispersed. And I think we need to ensure that these PLI schemes actually become effective, become implemented. So one of the things we want to work with government is how do you make the PLI schemes effective? In some industries like electronics, drones, semiconductors, to some extent in pharmaceuticals, they've been very effective. But in a lot of the other sectors, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think that plus the R&D piece is very critical. I think the clarification and the circular that the government came up with got approved by cabinet yesterday. I think that's really a massive allocation of 1 lakh crore. We do hope and pushing government that it gets implemented quickly, that they appoint the agencies that are going to disburse them, and that disbursement happens on an interest-free basis or very, very low interest. Because if they charge high interest, or if the time spent is more, then the effectiveness or efficacy of that scheme will not be there. So we have identified what are the areas from a manufacturing standpoint how India can be more competitive. Obviously, factor reforms are very important. Land, power, logistics, efficiency in labor. And land being one of the biggest issues, how we can get greater pools of land available, so we integrate at the state level. There are almost, when you go to a state, their land has been allocated, divided in 30, 40 different parts. This land can be used for so if they can be consolidated into 4 or 5 parts, so you don't have to apply for conversion every time. Even agricultural land which can be converted for industrial use should be earmarked earlier. The industrial park scheme that was launched through the budget, I think if that can be accelerated, the industrial parks, plug-and-play parks that have been allocated, if those information can be made, distributed more publicly, then people can start seeing, because when we talk, and especially for MSMEs and also for the foreign investors who are looking at coming in, getting land is becoming one big challenge, obviously at a reasonable price. Land is available, but at a reasonable price. Even if we look at FSIs across states, it varies for industrial. For the same industry, in some state the FSI could be 1.5 and in some state the FSI could be 4. So is there a way that we can optimize the FSI for all the states, keep it at 4 depending on the industry that it is in, just to ensure that land, which is one critical area, gets sorted. A lot of land is parked with public sector enterprises, with PSUs, and I think that needs to be, that also needs to be, find ways of using that, especially if India wants to get converted and wants to become a manufacturing this thing. Cost of power is another area. Transmission infrastructure has to be accelerated, especially as we have more renewable coming through. Distribution, whether it's privatization of state level distribution units, whether it is listing of some of those units, whether it's providing more open access, whether it's doing the franchise way, but that is a bottleneck today. And some states have gone through it. We know UP is going through it right now. And I think this has to be done across. Because of cross subsidization, the cost of manufacturing is higher. So that's something that we are going to the government to try and see. So distribution and accelerating the transmission grid is very critical to ensure that cost of, I am providing open access, that the cost of power comes down. It has come down over the last few years, but for India to be manufacturally competitive, this is very important. Logistics, again, we've been leading, the Minister, Honorable Minister, Mr. Gadkari has been talking a lot about it. India's logistics costs have been coming down, but still 4 to 5% difference between where India is today and where China is. And a lot of investments are happening on the road side, on likewise on dedicated freight corridors. There is one between Delhi and Mumbai, but we should be looking at some of the other DFCs that can be built to try and see how logistics costs can be reduced, especially from a railways standpoint. Supply chains and global value chains, I think we have a template today. Electronics has been one of our greatest success stories from a manufacturing standpoint in the last 2 to 3 years. And if you look at the anchor point of that, it was the PLI scheme, but also we invited Apple, which is one of the largest players, and their entire ecosystem to come to India, worked with them closely, ensured the bottlenecks that were there were removed. Likewise, in key industries, whether it's aerospace and defense, whether it's footwear, whether it's garments, especially those which are labor-intensive industries. If we can get the key players, and CII has been working with Niti and others to try and see how do we get the key players in so that the manufacturing, and then bring them in and manufacturing can happen. And once the key player comes in, then the entire ecosystem and value addition develops. So if I look at Nike today, Nike sources almost 50% of their products from Indonesia. Almost 20-25% of balance comes from China, and maybe 1 to 2% comes from India. There's no reason why India's share in that should be higher. And the same is true for garments, for clothes and everything else. So I think that's something that we need to do. The second area is to see how do we build more resilient supply chains. We are seeing the example of magnets, but if we look at industry by industry, for example, air conditioner as an industry, India will be one of the largest manufacturers of air conditioners, but we don't make the most critical component, compressors. We have to create a PLI scheme. We are working with the government to say a PLI scheme, technology partnership, whatever support that's required that India should build their own compressor ecosystem, because again we are dependent on a few countries who are the key critical suppliers for those compressors. So working on some of those, and whether it's through PLIs, whether it's through viability gap funding, and that's why the importance of a sovereign wealth fund where some of these things can be there. FTAs we have already talked about, and CBAM is a big issue that Indian industry is facing, especially as we look at the EU FTA, and I think CII has made recommendations to the government and has put a business case to say how it should not be used as a non-tariff barrier where Indian industry gets disadvantaged. The National Manufacturing Mission is a great example of, because the next level of manufacturing competitiveness will come how center, state, various ministries of center, various state come together, look at the industry, try and see how they can resolve the issues. And I think to that extent, if it can be made a much more action-oriented body rather than the advisory body, it also becomes a platform where industry can engage with various stakeholders, because issues are not related to one industry. And also for advanced manufacturing, which is very critical, if they can have another subgroup I think that will be very, very critical. But this is a great example and something that CII has been recommending, that like GST, like natural, we have to create platforms where stakeholders from different ministries of center, stakeholders from state can come together and resolve issues going forward. MSMEs we've talked about. There is a self-reliant fund that was created in 2019, about 10,000 crores, which was being handled by the MSME. It's hardly been utilized. SIDBI, MSME, and SBI caps and everything. So, we need to double down on this. MSMEs need capital, MSMEs need scale, MSMEs need technology, MSMEs need R&D, and to the extent that the new R&D scheme that's come out, I think will be very helpful for MSMEs, but they need capital today. And I think that's why these creation of these funds and ensuring that there's deployment that happens and things that are stuck up for various reasons are unlocked. So we are representing to the MSME ministry to try and see how some of these things can be unlocked so that the money can be utilized for more productive purposes. Again, we've talked about R&D on minerals. Coal has been a great example of how production has increased, and one of the reasons why that spurred it was instead of giving first an exploratory license EL and then a mining license, the government actually issued comprehensive license. So in many categories of minerals, the government needs to start looking at trying to see how you can issue comprehensive license right up front. Because the whole thing is, instead of taking 5, 6, 7 years, if this can be done in 12 months, 18 months, and private sector is willing to participate, it has a massive impact on competitiveness. On rare earth, obviously, CII has a separate council. We are engaging with the government to try and see, because there is sensitivity, there is radioactivity in some of the products, but how government with the controls, in partnership with industry, how can we build resilience so that one after the other we don't get caught up in products. We are now seeing that one after the other there will be things that are slowing down the growth of manufacturing in India, and I think therefore the resilience in supply chain is very critical. Labor, what we are telling states is the critical elements of labor code need to be now implemented in states. If they can't implement in the full state, at least create specific industrial parks where some of these labor things can be implemented, and especially for labor intensive manufacturing, if we can ensure that we have more female labor participation, the laws that are required to enable greater female labor participation is very, very critical. And in electronics, we are seeing factories that have 70%, 80%, 100%. In garments, likewise, very high female labor. So the laws that are required, whether it's in terms of timing, whether it's creating hostels, whether it's having creches, I think all those are critical and have to be embedded, but a lot of this has to happen at a state level. So we talked about reforms, we talked about what CII is pushing from a manufacturing standpoint. The third area is AI, technology and AI. And there are 3 or 4 elements. One is obviously the broader national AI authority that can be created, which looks at AI holistically. We are now clearly seeing that in many industries, CII has done an analysis, for example, in technology industry. If you can break up the jobs into 1,200 odd different jobs, the entire industry in 1,200 jobs, almost 50 to 60% of them will get impacted by AI, i.e., they will become much more efficient. In some cases, they can be replaced. So how can India become more competitive through AI? I think that's very critical. The second piece is, I think it's very clear that the government has done a tremendous job of now actually saying India should be building its own LLMs. They're providing the funding. I think they've already funded 4 to 5 national scale, large scale LLM, and work is happening there, and also taking chips from NVIDIA to accelerate that. So that piece, and from a policy standpoint, how that can be accelerated. From a CII standpoint, we are wanting to take, especially to our members, how can they be using AI better. We've also created our own COE to take to MSMEs and also for skilling. Skilling will be a very, very important part, and how can industry, government and other agencies work on the skilling side. The government has talked about creating 4 or 5 COEs. accelerate, ensuring that those COEs get accelerated, and ensuring that India continues to be the global capital, use case capital for AI. So the GCC and everything else, and how we can accelerate that. The other issue, there is clearly AI will have an impact on the different quality of jobs. So, how the job market evolves, changes, I think that's very, very critical from an AI standpoint. And at least our view is that the government and industry need to work very actively to see how we can create much better skilling so that the new jobs can be taken up, how newer areas like tourism and others can be developed, and we'll talk something about that in the future slides. But it is time that in the next 2 to 3 years, AI, and especially in the younger blue-collar area, AI will start having an impacting on jobs, and how we can deal with that proactively will be very, very critical. On energy transition, given AI, usage of AI, data centers, as the per capita consumption grows, the energy consumption, per capita consumption in India will grow significantly. But India, to be successful, has to have a much lower carbon intensity growth. And for that, the focus on energy transition is very important. I think we have a great success story on solar, but also looking at other alternatives like nuclear going forward. And I think there's a lot of impetus from a government. So amending laws that are required to make nuclear energy, especially the small modular reactors, more effective. I think that will be very important. Secondly, the solar supply chain, solar generation, then storage, whether that storage is in terms of battery storage, pump hydro, the evolution of hydrogen, the PLI scheme in hydrogen. So ensuring that irrespective of the noise in the world on sustainability, that India continues its path on energy transition, and there also the center and state need to work in a very coordinated fashion. The delay in PPAs that are happening, how do we ensure that those delays, we talked about the transmission grid being developed at a very accelerated pace, that's very, very important. On air pollution, CII has made its very detailed recommendations to various agencies, to the new state government as well, and we're hoping that some of them will get implemented, especially in Delhi and also in some of the other cities. So that's an area we are working on water resources, I think, and other areas on how do we play a more active role on the conservation of that. And I think it's becoming clear that climate change will have an impact on agriculture, climate change will have an impact on inflation. And therefore, one is dealing with those issues, but I think the agenda that CII really wants to drive hard is on adaptation, because adaptation is where this will have the greatest impact. And I think CII, through its various center of excellences and also through the various groups, is trying to focus more and more on adaptation to ensure that the impact of climate change on agriculture, on crops, on inflation is mitigated. Livelihoods, and I touched a little bit on this, but let me start with agriculture, because I think large part of India is still engaged in agriculture, and we've had as we call it, a 3P approach on agriculture, which is focused on productivity, preservation, and profitability of agriculture. So all our policies are trying to address one of the three things. I think there have been some areas which have become very, very important, critical. I think the entire value addition, whether it's through food processing industry, whether it's through specified crops, I think that's an area that we are focusing on. I think India needs to be setting up a cold chain network similar to Container Corporation. I think we are recommending that we build a cold chain, corporation that's created for setting up cold chains around. And also, if I look at the Warehousing Corporation of India, some of the warehouses are so old that the FSI can be better utilized, they can be made much more modern, they can be utilized much more effectively. And the entire FPOs, we have 20,000 FPOs, that's been a great experiment. we need to be trying to see how the FPOs can be increased. We are recommending to government the interest cost that the FPOs have to bear, that has to be reduced. The mandi tax that the FPOs have to pay, they have to be reduced. So I think on the agricultural side, that's a big focus for us. In tourism, I think both for manufacturing and tourism, I think the re-emphasis on brand India and how CII can reactivate the brand equity fund is very, very critical. And secondly, some states have done it, given the industry status to tourism, but some states have to do that, and that really helps in tourism becoming more competitive by reducing the cost, whether it's the power cost, whether it's some of the other interest cost and others, and I think that's an area that CII has made recommendations to Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Commerce on the entire overseas employment. This requires a partnership at a G2G level. This requires on a language side how we can skill our people from in different languages. So CII has been working especially with the government of Japan in skilling on the Japanese language, and then people being available. And the third is skilling. And then the G2G relationships and building the supply pool for that is very critical. And our view is, even in many cases, in many of these families, even if one person can go for 2 to 3 years, so that it doesn't create a lot of times people are worried in different countries that if people are there and move for a longer time, it creates a dissonance in the society. But even if they are there for 3 to 5 years and are able to come back, the impact on the economy, the impact on the families, the impact of upgrading of skills in India is very high. I mean, India gets almost 115, 120 billion dollars on inward remittances, and if that has to grow, I think we need to be encouraging this, and a very, very strong way of upskilling as well. The other pieces of skilling, and I think one of the big mismatches that industry today is facing is on availability of skilled manpower. So the recommendations that we have made to the government is that demand assessment has to be much more robust, much more stronger, of what kind of skills are required, what is the demand for that. Second is the demand varies from region to region. So if in Tamil Nadu we are building the EV ecosystem to a large extent, then can we have more people who are trained and specialized on EVs and skilled on EVs in Tamil Nadu? In Gujarat is building big semiconductor, then can we ensure that we get more skilling of semiconductors professionals in Gujarat? So I think there is a regional element to this as well as we look at build skilling. Then when we are doing PLI schemes for these skills and advanced skills, can we ensure that the pedagogy for this is developed? Can there be better industry participation along with government to ensure that the investments that are required and the pedagogy development that happens is done? And finally, I think the crowding in for skilling infrastructure, the capital, whether it's from private sector, government, CSR funds, needs to be done. This is, if India has to accelerate in manufacturing, it's a bit like water everywhere but nowhere to drink, nothing to drink. So there is a lot of people available, but today one of the things that is hindering private sector capex growth is also because companies who are really wanting to accelerate at rapid pace, if you ask them, one of the biggest challenges is availability of skilled talent. And I think that's something that, and the ELI scheme that's been brought in, I think is very good. The internship scheme that is there, I think CII is trying to see how that internship scheme can be made more effective. The CII members are very actively participating in the internship scheme, which will really enable on-the-job skilling. So these are some of the, it's not moving here. So the CII initiatives that we are looking at launching this year, some of the are existing initiatives, and you will see them, a lot of what we have talked about is where CII, one is obviously making policy recommendations, engaging with our members, getting the feedback from members and making the policy recommendations, but also creating institutes, committees to do that. So the Multi-Skilling Training Institute for CII, where we are working actively on the ground to ensure that skilled talent, manpower is available, and I think really looking at accelerating that from 7 million to 30 million odd. The model career centers have been very successful. We have set up some recently, even in some cities, and they have worked very well, and I think there is an acceleration on that. MSMEs, I did talk about AI and what we are doing on the AI side, where we've launched a center of excellence for AI. And the other new initiatives that CII is working on is around sustainability. I think the CII's sustainability initiatives, the green initiatives that we are doing, trying to educate our members, trying to see how we can, for them to adopt sustainability. Again, working on energy transition, specifically on hydrogen. We talked about the FPO. And obviously, trust is extremely, as I talked about, is an article of faith for CII, is extremely important, and critical minerals we've already talked about. Thank you. So this is the sort of a quick overview of what we are looking at from our agenda for CII. Some of it is in continuation and some what we are focusing on. So open for
coming Will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rajiv, for such a very detailed presentation, and I'm sure we can go on for question answers, but we'll take a few, and of course during the next few days and few hours you will talk to many offline too. But I start with a small correction. I had said 30th June instead of 30th May. Of your start date. Well, Rupshi, you wanted to start off. You've got a mic here, please, quickly. Rupshi from PTI.
Sir, Rupshi from PTI. Congratulations on taking over as the new president. You